Night school.
Night school.
I read a book called You Are What You Love by James K. Smith. He's trying to make the argument that we're defined by what we want most or what we pursue most or what we hold as our highest value. Not even highest value, but more specifically what we want to obtain most.
Okay.
And I'm always torn on how much of the book to actually share, like reading passages, right? What I'm going to do for this episode is I'm going to read 2 passages from the very beginning, and then there's not going to be any more out of the book for the rest of it.
Okay.
I'm going to read 2 pages that this is the part of the book that made the whole book worth it. I didn't like all of this book. This couple pages made the book worth it because what he's doing is he's describing the religious nature of a shopping mall, and it's so pungent, like it's almost psychedelic. Like if you think about having a psychedelic experience in a shopping mall and looking around and seeing the true intentions of the place that you're in.
Yeah, okay, totally.
He's doing that, and he's describing how a shopping mall conditions you to want certain things and behave a certain way, and
Sure.
how if you view that through a religious lens, it's alarming. And I think one of the benefits of being a religious person is that you become more conscious of the fact that the things that you do program you to a certain end. Like, I don't think that
Sure.
people who say that they don't believe in God don't have a God in the sense that they have a highest value.
Mhm.
And I think plenty of religious people have a God that I would think was stupid. But at least if you're religious, you're trying to be conscious of the fact that you hold some value highest.
Yeah.
And the things you do program you. So you get down on your knees and pray, or you do yoga or whatever it is. And so I think that's valuable about religion. And I think it's hard to unsee the description that he gives about a shopping mall. And it's hard not to apply it to other areas in my life where I'm being programmed in ways that I've just kind of gotten used to, or I just take
Cool.
for granted.
Yeah, sounds right up my alley.
Upon approach, the architecture of the building has a recognizable code that makes us feel at home no matter what city we're in. The large glass atriums at the entrances are framed by banners and flags. Familiar texts and symbols on the exterior walls help the foreign faithful quickly and easily identify what's inside, and the sprawling layout of the building is anchored by larger pavilions or sanctuaries akin to the vestibules of medieval cathedrals. We arrive at one of several grandiose entries to the building, channeling us through a colonnade of chromed arches to the towering glass face with doors lining its base. As we enter the space, we are ushered into a narthex of sorts intended for receiving, orienting, and channeling new seekers, as well as providing a bit of a decompression space for the regular faithful to enter in to the spirit of the space. For the seeker, there is a large map, a kind of worship aid, to help orient the novice to the location of various spiritual offerings and provide direction into the labyrinth that organizes and channels the ritual observance of the pilgrims. One can readily recognize the regulars, the faithful, who enter the space with a sense of achieved familiarity, who know the rhythms by heart because of habit-forming repetition. The design of the interior is inviting to an almost excessive degree, drawing both seekers and the faithful into the enclosed interior spaces, with windows on the ceiling open to the sky, but none on the walls open to the surrounding moat of automobiles. The sense conveyed is one of vertical or transcendent openness that at the same time shuts off the clamor and distractions of the horizontal, mundane world. This architectural mode of enclosure and enfolding suggests sanctuary, retreat, escape. From the narthex entry, one is invited to lose oneself in this space that channels the pilgrim into a labyrinth of octagons and circles, inviting a wandering that seems to escape from the driven, goal-oriented ways we inhabit the outside world. The pilgrim is also invited to escape from the mundane ticking of clock time to inhabit a space governed by a different time, even a sort of timelessness. With few windows and a curious Baroque manipulation of light, it also seems as if the sun stands still in this space as we lose consciousness of time's passing, and so lose ourselves in the rituals for which we've come. However, while daily clock time is suspended, the worship space is still governed by a kind of liturgical, festal calendar, variously draped in the colors, symbols, and images of an unending litany of holidays and festivals, to which new ones are regularly added, since the establishment of each new festival translates into greater numbers of pilgrims joining the processions to the sanctuary and engaging in worship. The layout of this temple has architectural echoes that harken back to medieval cathedrals, mammoth religious spaces designed to absorb all kinds of religious activities happening at one time. And so one might say that this religious building has a winding labyrinth for contemplation, alongside of which are innumerable chapels devoted to various saints. As we wander the labyrinth in contemplation, preparing to enter one of the chapels, we'll be struck by the rich iconography that lines the walls and interior spaces. Unlike the flattened depictions of saints one might find in stained glass windows, Here one finds an array of three-dimensional icons adorned in garb that, as with all iconography, inspires our desire to be imitators of these exemplars. So it goes on a little more, but that's my favorite part.
Yeah.
So that's why I ended there, is how if you go into like a Catholic cathedral or any really old school cathedral like that, you'll see images of various saints. And I would think that seems a bit, before reading this book, I would think that seems a bit polytheistic or kind of man worshipping. Like, why do we have pictures of all these people all over the place?
Yeah, yeah.
But it's designed to condition you to be like those people, be like those images that you see at church.
Sure.
Maybe you relate more with one saint or another.
Sure.
And there's a quote from Paul in the Bible who says, "Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ." So part of the design of the church is to be intentional about saying, we're following the perfect guy. So if you relate to me, at least follow me as I follow the perfect guy. Which seems flawed to me, because it's like, shouldn't everyone just directly follow the perfect guy?
Right. This is like an extra, it's like an extra translation in the middle of it, which kind of distances itself from the original meaning.
Right.
It seems like that.
Yeah, you can't, you're not modeling perfection perfectly. You know,
Right.
you're not perfectly acting like Jesus, so like, why am I going to follow you? But it's better
Yeah.
than nothing. It's a better intention than the saints of them all. It's like, don't you want to
Sure.
look like this statue? Don't
Yeah.
you want to come in here and buy this
course.
shit? So one more piece from the book, and then
Yeah.
putting down the book. We often hear of brand loyalty, even brand devotion. But do people really worship brands? Is consumerism really such a liturgical experience? It may not be as far-fetched as you think. In a recent study to consider the effect of super brands, such as Apple and Facebook, researchers made an intriguing discovery. When they analyzed the brain activity of product fanatics, like members of the Apple cult, they found that the Apple products are triggering the same bits of their brain as religious imagery triggers in a person of faith.
That makes perfect sense.
That's interesting, right?
And that is certainly like that's the best example of that, I think. Like the people that are super into, like I have brand loyalty to some things, but like it's to like certain food items and things like that. And so I imagine that there would be a lot less of that sort of firing for that sort of firing off in your brain for that sort of thing. But Apple is such a big one where people are like obsessed with these products and wait in lines for a week before a phone comes out so that they can have one more feature in addition to their other phone. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense that you'd react the same way to that.
Right. But so something that struck me as discouraging as I was reflecting on this, because I was thinking, well, the church is trying to convince people to be like people who are trying to be like Jesus. That's a fairly decent thing to do. And these companies are trying to convince people to be whatever they would be if they bought a lot of that company's shit. And that seems a pretty inconsiderate thing to do.
Sure.
Not necessarily evil, but just, I don't care if it's good or bad for your character. I want you to buy my shit. So be this kind of person. And then when you're that kind of person, you'll buy my shit. But I thought, but what's the wealthiest organization on the planet?
Walmart.
The Catholic Church.
Oh, yeah, probably. Yeah.
So it's kind of fucked up. Like, it's like, well, are they trying to get you to imitate Jesus, or are they trying to siphon off connection? Like, are they trying to capitalize on people's interest in Jesus by telling them, if you want to be like Jesus, follow me, and then making a bunch of money off that? It's like not quite perfect either, right?
Yeah, I do think that there's probably an element because it's the Catholics that do most of the, like I don't know,
The saint stuff.
yeah, the saint
Totally,
stuff
it's
is,
totally a Catholic thing.
and the Catholic Church also has many instances of like, you know, the men within the church want power for themselves. And I'm speaking very broadly of like all examples of bad men within the Catholic Church that like they want power for themselves and they want admiration for them. They do things like kiss my ring. Like they do that, which is
Very strange.
such a strange kind of ritual. And I feel like there's probably a part of it that is we put these dead men up on pedestals so that you know that it's possible that I might also be as holy as them and that like a man can be worthy of worship, because then that means that it is at least possible for me to be as important as this guy. And isn't he important? He's on the wall.
Right.
I imagine that there's some of that's part of the motivation for it, that like worshiping certain men means that it's more likely that people will worship them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that. It seems that the most pure thing that you could do is either to say, uh, turn to God and be whoever you are when you turn to God, or turn to Jesus. Because either of those things, they're not going to make anybody money,
Right.
and they're not. Even if you're not a Christian, it's like Jesus is a better idol than most things. So and it's just not even like, I don't want to assume that anybody listening is a Christian. So it's like, if you don't think that Jesus is the perfect idol, still at least pointing people to Jesus is not something that you're personally going to make money directly on, right? Like I went to a Buddhist monastery one time, and I asked the Buddhist what I should do in a time of mental health difficulties. He said, go home and meditate. So he didn't say stay here and tithe. He
Right.
said go home and meditate. That's pure. You're not
Right.
getting anything from me. Tell me go home and turn into the center of your being.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with me. I have nothing for you. Go home and meditate.
I remember.
And you go to a church and you ask, like, what should I do? And they're like, show up here every weekend at 9 a.m. And then the first thing they say at 9 a.m. is give us your money. It's like, it's kind of cringe.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, like when you asked that monk that, then you were like, well, is it like better to meditate here, or are there better places to meditate? And he's like, no, it doesn't matter. Just wherever you are, meditate. Wherever, it's fine.
Right. Because
Yeah.
I'm looking for a holy space, right? Because I was seeking the holy. I was seeking the divine. So I'm like here's a holy space. This place is very quiet and clean, and these people seem to have good intentions, and Buddhism seems like a decent thing. I want to come here to this holy space and be in the midst of it. But there's this Buddhist author I like, that's not Han. He wrote a book called At Home in the World. I like that idea. So anywhere's home and anywhere's holy. That's the Buddhist way.
Yeah.
Everywhere's home and everywhere's holy. Meditate wherever you are. We're getting a little off track, but the point is, like, any organization, whether religious or not, might be manipulating you into being whatever you need to be so that they can get your money.
Totally.
And what's really pure is telling people either turn to God or go home and meditate.
Yeah. One more thought on on the saints. So in like the original Star Wars movies, there's not that many characters, and in the prequels and the sequels, there's a lot of characters, and there's a lot more like variations of characters and outfits for characters, and it feels like a lot of what's going on is that they just throw more characters in so that they can sell more action figures. And the Catholic Church is big on merch, and I wonder if part of it is like, the more saints they can prop up, the more things they can sell.
Yeah.
The more they can make money on, like Mexican candles with Saint Valentine or whatever on it. The more they can make money on that type of stuff.
Those things
more
always
action
end up at
figures.
Big Lots and the dollar store and Ross and everything.
Yeah. It might be a little bit of that. Like maybe that
Right.
wasn't the intention originally, but it's clearly part of the business model.
And I do think that it's a wonderful thing to do, to seek out people who have achieved sainthood and then put them up and say, look, this person did it too. You can too. There's one of the people I kind of consider a mentor, but I just started hanging out with him recently. He's the chair of the board at Eastlake, John Inman. He was telling me about this lady who runs a local Christian leadership thing. And he's like, I can't remember her name. It was Maria or something like that. He's like, she's not Maria, though. She's Saint Maria. If you'll meet her, you know what I mean. This woman is walking light. And he's like describing her like that. That's a really good thing to do.
Sure.
But it is super easy to capitalize on.
Right. I mean, he didn't try to sell you a candle with a picture of her on it.
No, he didn't.
He was just
just
saying,
wanted
this is
me
a good
to
person
know
you
that
should
it's
emulate.
possible to achieve sainthood.
Yeah.
Maria did it. She's wonderful.
Yeah.
And he's going to introduce me to her, and he's going to pay for me to go to a leadership training thing with her. So that's a pure representation of it. Like, hey, there's a saint. I'll pay for you to go learn from them. That's a pure way to express that. But like, here's a saint, pay me to learn from them,
Right.
like the Catholics do. It's like, intentions may be better than the mall.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Since Star Wars came up, I'm gonna. There's something about Star Wars in this book,
Oh yeah.
so I'll take that as a Jungian synchronicity and peep this Star Wars part. Early on, it seems that Lucas wanted to inflect the story with a Buddhist theme, that it is attachment that causes evil, that people turn to evil when they can't let go. But by Return of the Jedi, some other story is at work in Lucas' imagination, because Vader is redeemed not by distance, but by attachment. Isn't that
Yeah.
interesting?
Yeah, I guess I'd have to think about that more, whether I think that's true or not, that he's redeemed through attachment. But I definitely agree that, like, yeah, that, like, there's, if you are too focused on something being important, even another person, you can end up doing bad things in order to protect them. I'll have to think about that more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really interesting point, though, because there's obviously a lot of those like Buddhist or Taoist themes about releasing attachment because attachment leads to resentment, leads to the dark side, da da da.
Yeah.
But then the fact that Vader still has enough love in his heart, it doesn't necessarily point to attachment. Because it was, why was it that he turned good at the last second? Is because he loved Luke?
Yeah, yeah, it's because Luke was trying to appeal to him, and the Emperor was doing the shocking him, and then he was like, you know what, fuck this, and he picks up the Emperor and throws him down the chute. So it's out of love for his son and his son's uh like unwillingness to give up on him that ends up bringing him back to it. Um, so I suppose it's like I don't know. It's not really his attachment to his son though, because
I take it that way.
do
I
you?
would think of it that way. Well, if I'm imagining if I am Darth Vader in that situation,
Hmm.
and I'm looking at my model for evil, and I'm looking at my son, and I'm remembering deep down like that's my son, and I think it would be the father instinct that triggered the change of behavior. That's the way I would think about empathizing with Vader's situation there. I would think of it as like the father instinct going like, no, I'm more attached to my son than I am to my obsession with winning this bad guy game.
Hmm.
But you could also say that he got to the end of the bad guy game and released attachment to it because he's at the end of the game. He's like, you know what? I did the whole thing. I'm at the top of the bad guys. What am I doing any of this for? I quit. I'm not attached to this anymore. You could read it that way too.
Yeah, yeah. I think there was also an element of like probably he was like Luke probably would have replaced like if Luke would have given in to Palpatine, then it would have been to replace him. So he also had just realized how replaceable he was within the Sith hierarchy. I think that was probably a part of it too.
So is that did Palpatine say that right in front of him, like to Luke, trying to turn Luke? I don't remember seeing that well.
I don't know if he directly said it. Did he directly say that?
Yeah, he says,
Like kill your father and take your place at my side or something like that?
he says, take your place at my side. I don't
Yeah.
remember if he says, kill Vader. I don't remember exactly what he said.
But that seems like that's what it would apply if he says, "Take your place at my side."
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
While you're chiming in, Evan, does the LDS Church do the saint thing too?
No.
Gotcha.
No, do you recognize any other saints that other Christian religions recognize?
No, we don't do any of that, I guess.
But so Evan's saying LDS Church doesn't do the saint thing, like declare people saints. As far as you know, is the Catholicism the only branch of Christianity that does that? That has a list of people that they say are declared
Yeah, I think it's just
sainthood?
Catholic.
Yeah.
And
I've never heard of another.
So if there's another denomination that does it, all three of us are morons.
they're the biggest one too, so they have a lot of influence, I guess.
Right. There might be little denominations here and there, like the Westboro Baptist Church. It's like, man, you went to so many rallies. You're it.
Yeah, you ruined a ton of funerals.
You done it.
Man never missed a funeral.
So what the mall thing made me think of is the fact that we are sheep in the sense that we are impressionable like sheep. We follow
Sure.
something. And something that turns off some people to the idea of Christianity is that Christians declare that they are sheep. Like we say, we are sheep, we follow something, we're just sheep for the right shepherd. And there's
Yeah.
something a little bit cringy, childish, naive, just like ugly, self-deprecating about that. We are sheep. That's really hard on the ego,
Yeah.
but if it's true that we're sheep in the sense that we are impressionable in a way that's beyond our control, then the only honest thing you could say to us is, you are sheep, I'm the right shepherd, follow me, I'm going to help you out of this situation. And if we are, then we would turn to that shepherd and say, no, we're not sheep, we have this on our own.
Hmm.
And so,
I wonder if culturally it didn't have the stink on it that it does now, like the sheeple idea. Like maybe that didn't feel at all negative when it was written. There was nothing negative about
Yeah,
following,
maybe.
about like it's a sheep doing
Maybe
what it
the
should do.
maybe the fact that the Judeo-Christian tradition used sheep as that icon led to it becoming that iconic caricature later.
Yeah.
That if you follow something intentionally, you're a sheep.
Yeah.
It's like, fuck, maybe we're all sheep, but religious people are at least trying to find the right thing to follow, whether we're right or not.
Right.
Who knows? But at least people who are religious are trying to find the right thing to follow and admitting that they're sheep. It's like those people walking around at the mall. I can't say but I would think it's likely that a lot of them are deeply and dangerously impressionable and unaware of what's impressing upon them. And if you
Yes.
asked them,
Yeah.
"Are you sheep?" they would say, "No, I do what I want." And then they
Yeah.
would go on like doing things that other people told them to do that they never even noticed. And so if it's true for a lot of people, it's probably true for me. And if it's true for me, I should probably figure out what the right thing is to follow.
Mhm.
I think that's a reasonable line of thinking. So that mall thing made me think about the sheep concept a lot. I had a problem with it, like even as recently as a year ago when I was in the internship at New Vintage,
Mhm.
and the idea of being a sheep came up. I found it really insulting and patronizing, like really hard on my ego to hear that idea. But the way that James Smith presented it allowed me to first judge other people for being sheep and then just accept that I also am a habitual creature and that I am a sheep in that sense
Mhm.
too, and see it in a practical way. Like, what do you mean I'm a sheep? You're just saying I'm a dumb idiot that follows around anyone? But sheep didn't follow around anyone. Sheep have the
Right.
ability to recognize the voice of their shepherd.
Right. It's
So they're not
if a
just
guy walked
morons
up.
that follow around whatever.
Right. Yeah, I was just saying if a guy walked up, it's not like they'd follow like, oh, which guy do I follow now? They're gonna keep following the
Right.
dude.
Right. So being a sheep isn't that bad as long as you're following something decent and supposedly there's a right thing to follow. So I don't know, we might as well try to figure it out.
Yeah, it's almost like the sheeple thing is like it's like just an anti-authority sentiment. It's like a you don't need to listen to what anyone else has to say kind of virtue
Mm.
or something like that.
I think it's an anti-ideology sentiment, but I don't think that the people expressing it as that sort of sentiment understand their own ideological issues. Like,
Sure.
it's a way of looking at somebody else and saying they are just falling in line with a set of ideas.
Mhm.
You know, it's like, well, are you not falling in line with a set of ideas? Like, what are you, like,
Yeah, everyone is.
I think Nietzsche is an example of somebody who tried to rise above sheephood. Like as far as I understand, which I definitely do not understand Nietzsche's philosophies correctly, but as far as I understand, he was saying since we're getting rid of and attempting to graduate from our idea of God, our only option left is to become gods ourselves that are capable of self-regulating and self-calibrating and all those things, rather than having that collective consensus idea of God. And it seems like he tried to go out on his own and just achieve a union with truth by thinking his way to it. And it
Yeah.
led to a lot of really useful brilliance and then a psychotic break, which is such a fascinating story.
He killed himself, didn't he? I think
Did he kill
I'm
himself?
pretty sure Nietzsche killed himself. Yeah.
Evan's pulling that up. So this other idea he expressed I liked was he said that people think of temptation as something intellectual. People think of temptation as something that an idea will pop up in your head and then you've got a multiple choice response, a series of multiple choice answers that you can give to that temptation. The idea to eat cake pops up and then you go, yes, I will eat cake, or no, I will eat cake, as though the temptation presents itself and then you just make a choice or have a conversation with the temptation. And he says that most temptation is really habitual. And so that's a benefit of being religious, I would think, too, is that at least you would try to figure out what your temptations are and actively seek them out. Like, where are they and how are they influencing me already and how can I stop them, as opposed to just unconsciously assuming that all of the habits you have set up for yourself are decent and then just doing whatever feels habitually right. You just wake up in the morning and do what you do in the morning. Like, I wake up in the morning and stare at my smartphone for the first 10 to 25 minutes of the day, and I do that because I do that, But every morning, I don't receive the idea to look at my smartphone and then make a conscious decision to do it or not. So temptation doesn't really work like that.
Yeah. You mean that, like, if you're not paying attention to the fact that it is temptation, then it barely registers that it is?
Well, I don't know, because as I'm talking, something about what I'm saying isn't sounding true to me, and I'm wondering if James Smith is just playing with the word temptation
Maybe.
and plugging it into another context to try to make a point. Because pastors will do that all the time.
Sure,
Pastors
sure.
will just take a word and then go, "What habit really means is," and they'll make up a new definition to go make a point. And it's like, just use the word how it's intended.
Right.
And if you can't construct your point that way, then you lose. You lose. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
you can't just make up a word. So he might just be playing with words.
Right.
But I do think that. So real quick, Evan, did you look that up? Did Nietzsche kill himself?
No, he had poor health in his last years.
Oh.
Disease.
He died of some sort of poor health or disease,
He
and
had
was
pneumonia,
crazy.
And then he had a stroke, and then he died.
He had a what and then a stroke?
Pneumonia.
Pneumonia and a stroke.
Yeah, that's what he was doing when he died.
Yikes.
Just having those.
Huh.
No good.
Well, he was a genius, but he didn't exactly die peacefully. And
No.
he was the kind of guy that was like he said to avoid the church because the church is a place where you're told what to think, and he's like big on the problem of groupthink. He said in Beyond Good and Evil, churches are to be avoided at all costs. And he was talking about how they're just sheep being led in whatever direction, and I don't remember exactly his arguments, but was he right? I don't think so. Like, let's just go
Right.
off on our own and figure it out.
It makes me think of I can't remember which book it was, but the idea that of chastity and skepticism, that like he was very skeptical because there is so much bullshit in churches and so many different churches, and so to him it was simpler to be like, well, most of them must be bullshit, so let's just not do any of that. And so he was being very skeptical, but he was just skeptical for his whole life, and he just, because there was evidence that some could not be trusted, he just chose to never trust any of them. And it's kind of like the idea of like, if you're being skeptical, it's like you're being chased, and if you're being chased, there's no point in it if you're not saving it for something, saving
Right.
it for someone,
Right.
or saving it for an idea that actually is the right one.
Yeah.
Like, he wasn't really looking for the right answer. I shouldn't say that. I don't know enough about Nietzsche to say that, but I'm thinking that it's like he wasn't looking for the right answer because he decided you couldn't possibly know it anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would hope that when he died, if he came before a great being, that great being would be like, "Hey man, you didn't find me, but you slashed up a lot of bullshit. You did great work." You know?
Yeah.
Because it does seem like that's what he did for his whole life, was just slash up bullshit left and right.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that doesn't mean that you ever found truth necessarily, but the way that he articulated all of the wrong ways to find truth were super useful and
Sure.
helpful to Christians and all sorts of people.
Yeah.
Well, I love reading Nietzsche. Brent here loves reading Nietzsche. Peterson talks about Nietzsche all the time. Can't go one podcast without mentioning Peterson. Yeah, cool guy. Anyway,
I listened
Go
to, I told you I listened to that Lex Fridman podcast with the Diana Pasulka, the author of American Cosmic, and she talked about Nietzsche a lot. She said that Nietzsche is her favorite philosopher, and she just loves him so much.
nice.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like philosophy could only take you so far, right? Like at the beginning of Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche roasted every philosophical body of philosophy, like every type of philosophy he roasted, every type of philosopher he was roasting, and he was just describing that everybody is just full of shit in their own way, and that philosophers all have just chosen a worldview and then just set out to promote that worldview for the sake of their own pride. So he was hardly a philosopher. He was almost a philosopher of philosophy. Like he philosophized about philosophy.
Sure.
Like you could say that C.S. Lewis was a Christian philosopher because he philosophized about Christianity.
Mhm.
But Nietzsche philosophized about philosophy itself. So he's saying like the problem with philosophy in general is that everybody just decides on a worldview and then they convince themselves that that's absolute reality.
Yeah.
And then in a cringy display of self-worship, go about promoting that as absolute truth.
Right.
And it's like, are you at that point committed to truth, or are you just
Right.
playing a posturing game like anybody else, but it's a slightly higher posturing game, so it doesn't look like waving your feathers around, but it really is just waving your intellectual feathers around.
Right.
So if that criticism of philosophy itself is true, how far can philosophy itself really bring you? Can
Yeah.
it bring you to a point where you really understand everything? Because philosophy is just taking ideas and then stacking them together until you get to higher ideas.
Yeah.
Does it go to the top, or is it a Tower of Babel situation where eventually it just gets knocked down because you can't
Sure.
climb up that way?
Yeah. I'm sure that a lot of philosophers fall to like confirmation bias and just start looking for
Oh God, yeah.
things that support what they've decided their thing is, and
Yeah.
looking away from things that go against their thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
confirmation bias thing definitely
Right.
happens. It's the same as like scientists that have a certain theory about the way that something works, and then like mock something that is disruptive to what is popularly thought.
Right.
It's like that would invalidate part of my life, so I cannot accept it to be true, and even if
Yeah.
it is, I will fight to hide it
Mm-hmm.
because I've already invested so much of me into this is true.
Right. And in that sense, the pursuit of truth really does require repeated psychological deaths.
Yeah.
And it really
yeah.
is hideous. It's a hideous process. Like to be able to hear new information and then go, oh, my impression of the world was just absolute dog shit. Oh, that's nice. I don't know what's going on at all.
Yeah.
You're just plunged into a sort of chaos where you're like, oh, nothing. Maybe eventually you could get used to that process, I guess. But it makes sense how
Yeah.
someone like Socrates goes around saying, hey, I don't know anything. What do you know? And
Yeah.
just sort of collecting wisdom and never really claiming to have any.
That's a really safe one to be your thing. Is I don't know anything.
Yeah, if something must be your thing,
That's a good
you're
one.
probably not going to hit a brick wall with that one. I don't
Yeah.
know anything. You got anything? I don't know anything. You got
Still
anything?
no, still no. All right.
So on the back, there's a quote that says, "You might not love what you think." And the first meaning of that sentence is that you might not really be holding as your highest value what you would think you are holding as your highest value. If intellectually you would say, I worship the Lord and Savior, the blood of the Lamb, and all like Christian stereotype slogans, but then if you looked at your behavior and your rituals and your
Totally.
daily grind, it's like, okay, so it would appear that you actually worship like how many likes you can get on this and that thing. And
Yeah.
so, but the other meaning of that statement, you might not love what you think, is just because you think something doesn't mean that you love it. And so he's repeatedly expressing this theme here that he feels that the church is too greatly emphasizing teaching people true Christian ideas instead of bringing people through a Christian practice that forms them. He feels that there's too much emphasis on that. So that's an issue that he's diagnosed and is setting up to correct with this book. You might not love what you think. Just because you think it doesn't mean you're going to love it. So by teaching people ideas about God, are we really getting them to a transformative place where they live in the presence of God or live with the real highest value as their highest value? Or are they just walking around thinking ideas about God sometimes? Like the difference between entertaining an idea repeatedly
Mm-hmm.
and incorporating that idea into the rest of your being.
Mm-hmm.
But something I don't like about this book is that he implies that thinking isn't valuable, that thinking can't bring you towards God. And there's this one quote that really struck me as odd and like incorrect and prideful is how it struck me. He said, if you're just going to church to get a top off on your intellectual knowledge, you don't need church for that. You can get that from Ellen, Oprah, or a TED Talk. It's like, I get what he's saying. If I think about a ridiculous caricature example of church where some guy just goes up and gives essentially a motivational speech and then presents that as church, problem isn't that the motivational speech was bad, but that isn't as valuable as what church could really be. And so it's taking the place of something that could be better. So I think that's cringe. But I have to drop a really stupid example of church in my head to validate his quote, saying, if you're just going to church for an intellectual top-off, you might as well just go to a TED Talk or Ellen or Oprah. It's like most churches are trying to urge and teach people to live the way that Jesus lived. They use emotional appeal to convince people to do it. They use stories to help people, to draw people's imagination into what it would be to do it. They use history to show people that it's valid and intellectually honest to do it. They're trying to convince people a million different ways to live the way that Jesus did. And so I don't think he's being fair. And one of the Buddhist teachings I really like is the Eightfold Path. And I don't remember what all 8 of them are, but it's like act right, think right, have right effort, have right intentions. And it describes 8 different levels of analysis at which you could judge a person. You know, are you what you think? Sure, partially. Are you what you do? Sure, partially. But the question is, are all of those levels of analysis of your character aligned with the same purpose?
Sure.
And for most people, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
So the Buddha is teaching people to align all of those things. Well, just because all of those things are aligned, does that mean that they're aligned toward the right end? Not necessarily, but probably. Because if you're intentional enough to think, do, intend all the same thing, you're not going to do all of that for the wrong thing, you know? Like people who are evil, who do horrible things,
right?
They're all mixed up in their internal structure so that part of them feels bad about what they're doing, but then part of them thinks that what they're doing is okay. So the thinking part tells the feeling part that it's okay that it's feeling bad because it thinks this other thing.
Right.
So they're thinking one thing and feeling another thing, and because I know what it's like to be evil. I do something bad. Like if I lie and then I feel bad about lying, but then the thinking Travis tells the feeling Travis to shut up.
Right, you
and they're
justify
arguing
it.
with each other.
Yeah.
It takes an internal argument to justify.
Yeah.
So if on all 8 levels of analysis of character, you are expressing the same essence, it's probably going to be the right essence.
Yeah.
Be straight like an arrow. And then I get this imagery when I think about the Eightfold Path of an arrow, all the way from your thoughts and intentions up to what you do and how you act and what you say and what you buy and all that. And it reminds me of the bullseye. And by the bullseye, I mean that the original Greek term, that's hilarious because we were just talking shit about people who talk about Greek terms. But the original Greek of the word sin, it meant to miss. But for real, it did. It meant to miss. It was an archery term.
that.
So I picture what Buddha's saying as like the arrow. And to sin is to miss. Well, how do you miss? Like your left hand, the back hand, has to be out of alignment with the front hand, the right hand, in order for the arrow to miss.
Sure.
So if they're aligned, as in the Eightfold Path
Okay,
expresses, you won't sin, as the Christians say. Like, I can see this imagery in my head that makes that all line up. And so all that to say, I really like Buddha's Eightfold Path model because I think it's a really practical way to think about right being and all of the different elements and levels of right being. And then I'm looking at an argument like this, where somebody says, it's not about what you think, it's about what you love. But what you love is formed by what you do. And it's just not as useful as the Eightfold Path model.
Yeah.
And Brent did a sermon. I told him I didn't like this part of it a few weeks ago, where he said, it was a couple months ago now, actually, but he said, your intentions don't matter, your actions do. And Brent's intentions were that he's trying to guide people to judge themselves less on their intentions and more on their actions, because apparently he had diagnosed that there was too much emphasis on intention and not enough on action. So he made that diagnosis of humanity in general or his congregation in general and decided to then apply that treatment and say, emphasize that less and that more by saying that doesn't matter and that does. and it just doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't seem wrong or bad. It just doesn't seem completely right. It's like, shouldn't we teach people what it would mean to live in alignment in all of those ways, to invite God into all those elements of our character, all those levels of our being?
Totally. Yeah.
But is this diagnosis that we're putting too much emphasis on thinking the right things and not enough on doing the right things true? I think so. I just don't like exactly the way he attacked it, but I agree with his diagnosis. And me personally, as well as just my diagnosis on humanity in general. But I personally place too much emphasis on reading books that will give me the right ideas and not enough emphasis on like the value of getting on my knees to pray. This genuinely valuable because you're programming your body to embody the value that you're subservient to something.
Mm-hmm.
And it will improve your character if you do that. If you physically get on your knees. Mr. Rogers did that. Physically got on his knees, and he had a little book with names written in it of people he was praying for. It's a physical process.
Mm-hmm.
So
I remember Dave Bechtel, who was the pastor at Bethel for a long time until recently. He said that every morning his knees are the first thing that touch the ground. That he like, which is kind of a funny. I don't know how you do that exact. Maybe he was.
it's funny because
maybe
I
he was-
remember that phrase, that my knees first thing to. I didn't know that's where we got it from. I must have heard it there too.
Yeah, yeah, must have.
That's
Although
awkward
now
movement.
that I'm thinking
There's
about
no
it, it's
way
like,
you slink off of your belly onto
I doubt. Yeah, he's an old guy. His knees
No way.
probably couldn't take that for 40 years. or
That's just
whatever.
a catchy slogan, Dave. You know
But-
what?
I bet his feet touched first.
I bet, dude.
Church wars.
Fraud. Bethel is a fraud.
They're a fraud. Everyone knows.
Their knees don't touch. What are they, yogis? What are they, sleeping on little rugs? What do you mean? So, but so I learned this word liturgy. I've heard that word a lot, liturgy and liturgical. And I looked up the definition today because I've picked it up on context clues. I picked up what it means. I didn't even like the definition that I read. It's just one of those words that's a little funky because it means the forms of worship in a publicly worshiping religious movement, like or religion. So like the forms of public worship of religious people. The way that I explain it to myself in my head is like liturgy is the body and worship is the soul. Like it's the physical encasing for worship, and it's typically something habitual or ritualistic.
Okay, yeah,
So-
ritual was the word I was thinking of. Like,
Yeah, it's some ritual that has to be physical because you could
Okay.
have a mental ritual like
Yeah.
a what do you call something, a mantra. A
Sure.
mantra is an intellectual ritual. Liturgy is physical. So actually the Catholic Church has two liturgies, I believe, one of which is the bread and wine thing and one of which has to do with the word of God. So maybe it's only physical in the sense that they're repeating something
well, they got a
with their
ton more than
mouths.
that, don't they? They got beads and they got crosses and
Yeah, but those are religious items or religious merch, if you prefer. Liturgy, it would be something that you regularly do as part of your religious service.
Okay.
So at Eastlake, we don't really have any liturgy. Like New Vintage, you could say they have a little liturgy because it's socially appropriate and only socially appropriate to stand up during worship. So that's a liturgy. We stand up to show respect for the fact that we're worshiping. If we're feeling impassioned, we move our hands around or do something physical to indicate that we're into this or display a posture of surrender. It's a valuable liturgy. I'm surrendering to a value greater than me. So they have a little bit. Eastlake doesn't really have any at all. And I have actually incorporated liturgy into my life more this week, but I didn't notice until today that corresponded with reading this book. So it might have had that impact on me because I've been doing the actually praying on my knees things more.
Yeah.
And I am a little bit of a better person when I do it. My character is a little more sound when I do that. Even though sometimes I get on my knees and I'm like, hey, shitty day, your universe is weird, I don't prefer you today. And I feel like I just have a little laughing moment with God where it's like, hey, I'm not enjoying this, but I'm at least going to come to the throne and complain.
Yeah.
I'm at least going to check in. Even, hey, I'm a piece of shit and I'm not enjoying life very much.
Mhm.
You know, how are you? But I'm still on my knees subservient. It's something.
Sure.
Because I think authenticity is the most important thing in prayer. Some people are really polite to God. I'd be talking shit. But anyway, so a couple of the topics that James Smith kind of indulges about is he rants about how weddings have become really materialistic rather than focused on a union for the sake of God.
Sure.
He rants about how youth services are modeled after secular liturgies rather than bringing young people through religious liturgies
Okay.
that are designed to unite them with God.
Because it's more like school than it is like church. Is that what
More
he
like a
means?
concert than it is like church, is the examples that he's talking about, like youth services
Oh.
where they're trying to make everything as fun as possible. Um, and he's saying that modeling religious liturgies after secular liturgies is a misstep that is not succeeding in not succeeding in walking young people through the process of being in union with God by like, as if you go to a Catholic service, you're going to get
Sure.
on your knees a couple of times
Yeah.
and stand up and repeat something. And there is something really valuable about that because you're embodying that process of surrendering to a value better and greater than you and repeating words that reinforce your religious values. As long as they're good religious values, it's a good thing to do. And if they're not, then it's a bad thing to do, but I would say it's better than not having any liturgy because at least you're trying to program yourself to some end rather than just being programmed by whatever happens to be around you. So anyway, he rants about youth services, and then he rants about how being made in the image of God can also mean that it can also mean something different if you use the word image as a verb, because image is also a verb that means to portray. And he says that we should image God, as in portray God for the world by acting like God to serve as an example. And it's like maybe made in the image of God also means image as a verb, but the word image as a verb doesn't fit in that sentence. So he really indulges a little bit in this book and
Yeah.
goes on some weird tangents and rants. And it's not, I think a book should be focused on presenting an idea or maybe set of ideas, but it doesn't seem like he was totally focused on that. Seems like the fact that we should use religious practice to calibrate our hearts toward God is such a broad subject. And the fact that society around us calibrates our heart to whatever they want to calibrate it to, and they don't care if it's good for us or not, and that's a problem. Those are such broad ideas that there's room to rant about whatever you want, and he did indulge in that a little bit. So I didn't enjoy reading the book for the most part, but it was useful information. And since I attend a church that is very reinvented, he bashes the idea of reinventing church. He wants church to remain what church is. He makes a really good argument for it. But I choose to live on the outskirts of Christianity, meaning that I have more fringe opinions and that I'm on the outskirts, as in I'm trying to usher people into it. So
Sure.
I attend a church that's on the outskirts of Christianity, but this book convinced me to incorporate physical liturgies into my life, and that's
cool.
going to be good for me and has been good for me, and it convinced me to be more conscious about how I'm being programmed on a daily basis, which is good. Buddhist, Christian, psychologist, anybody tell you that's good.
Totally. Yeah.
That's all I got. You got any final thoughts?
One thing that came to mind is that like I don't love the word love in the way that he used it there, because I think sometimes about the difference between thinking and belief, which I'm pretty sure is just something I got from Jordan Peterson. But like there are many things that I think, but if you were to watch my life, clearly I don't believe them because I'm not living like I believe the thing. Like ideas that I say on here all the time, like I don't always live my life as though I was sure that they're true.
Sure.
And I think believe is a lot better word than love, because like there's a lot of things that we do that we don't love. No, I don't love scrolling through Reddit on my phone usually. It's like something that you go to when you're bored, and it's just like something to do.
Right.
But I don't feel like love for it. But it is like as though I guess I'm putting value on it. I'm showing that I believe it has value by doing it all the time. But I feel like love is a weird word. You know what I mean? Like, I
Yes.
don't get what he's saying.
If I were to, so I don't know what James Smith would say, but if I were to take these ideas upon myself and try to convince you that he was right to use the word.
Sure.
So now I'm playing devil's advocate. This is not necessarily my actual stance, but I would say that um, the fact that you have a daily ritual of getting on Reddit and reading that information means that you love something enough that you go through that daily ritual every day to express that love. And one of the things that he's pointing out is that you either love what you love consciously or unconsciously. So an argument that Real Travis, with Real Travis Opinions, is making in this podcast is that at least religious people are trying to be conscious of what they love. Non-religious people are not conscious of what they love generally. They just love whatever they happen to love and they don't really think about it. So I would, and now playing devil's advocate, I would invite you to reflect on what it is that you love that drives you to scroll through Reddit every day. Because whatever it is, you're not aware of it. Because you can't tell me why you scroll through Reddit every day exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So if you reflected on that, you might find that you're expressing love, that an unconscious aspect of yourself that you haven't integrated into your character is in love with something that it shouldn't be in love with, and that you consciously are not in love with. And that if you did that reflection and you found that thing, you would break that habit because you would realize that it's serving a master you don't want to serve.
Yeah, maybe.
And actually, I turned out to mean everything that I said in playing devil's advocate.
Okay.
So.
Okay. So devil's good.
Yeah, the devil is good. That's pretty much the takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that like what I'm doing is that I love hearing the news, or like I love being annoyed by comments, or I love not being bored, or it
Yeah.
could be something like any of those things.
Who knows?
Yeah.
I cleaned up my Instagram. I got back on Instagram after a break, like every hipster. And after about a month of using it, I was like, yo, this is not working. I don't feel good when I'm on Instagram. And I went to my Discover page, which is where Instagram has an artificial intelligence that gives you content that you like. And you can just go to the Discover page and it'll just say, hey, we have what you like here. We have your personality totally figured out. Here's the content that you want. And my Discover page was like all half-naked girls like dancing. Because there's all these like, and they're cool dancers too. Like the TikTok trend, I think, started it. But girls just post videos of themselves dancing online, and they're doing cool dances, and they're hot, and they're happy. So you think that you're kind of watching it because they're happy, and they look like they have such like fun, sweet personalities that it's kind of a feel-good thing. But really, it's mostly just lust.
Right.
And
you
so
didn't know the vibes when you clicked on the thumbnail, though, which, yeah.
Right. So you're clicking on it for or yoga ones. The yoga ones are huge. I follow this meme page that posts a bunch of photos that it calls yoga anus, where it's like girls like doing like spread eagle yoga positions.
Right.
And it's just like you put a picture of your crotch on Instagram. This is not about the yoga practice, health, spiritual body, nothing. You're just posting a picture of your crotch on Instagram.
Yeah.
So I had a bunch of yoga shit on there too. So I was like, oh man. So that's I'm through Instagram I'm worshiping lust. That daily ritual is serving Venus, and so that's an example of that's an easy example because lust is so obvious. So whatever motivates you to scroll through Reddit every day points to a God that you unconsciously serve. I think that's his point about the fact that you are what you love. But a more accurate title of the book would be like, what you do indicates what you love, and that defines you, not what you think. That's really the thesis of the book, and it's sloppy and all over the place.
Sure.
So I didn't enjoy the book because I don't understand what point you're trying to make with this book exactly. I understand when I read Mere Christianity what C.S. Lewis is doing. Even though I don't agree with everything he says, I understand what he's trying to do. So I understand why I'm reading the book, and I always know that it's going somewhere, and I have a decent idea where it's going. And when I'm reading this book, I'm just like, it's a very sloppy thesis, I feel. And so the book is kind of all over the place, and I feel like these Christian authors sometimes are just cranking out their opinions.
Sure.
Like, hey, I think the church is too much of this and that. I think the church thinks too much. So let me think for you guys and teach you intellectually why intellectual teaching isn't valuable. And instead, you should just do liturgies and it's just like I really don't want to hear everybody's opinion. So
Yeah.
I honestly don't recommend this book, but I do recommend liturgies.
Sure.
And I do recommend being conscious of what you consume and what it's doing to you.
Cool. Yeah.
So, you got any final thoughts?
No,
Cool.
nothing else.
Night's cool.
Night school.